Hi, hopefully this works out okay. I'm going to separate out the Halliday background stuff and put into a PowerPoint. Apparently I'm having problems with my video. Maybe the file's too big. Anyway, I hope you can hear this fairly well. I'm going to give you some background on Halliday, or at least the information I think that's kind of useful to know a little bit in terms of trying to interpret where he's coming from and what he's talking about in his article. This is an incomplete introduction to systemic functional linguistics. It's by no means all that good. Let's see. So let's move on. Systemic functional linguistics, I'll call it functional linguistics because that's a mouthful, and sometimes I'll just call it FL because that's also a mouthful. It's a school of linguistics. It's popular mostly in the UK and Australia. It's very English-based. It's founded by Halliday, our author of our article. It's a descriptive and interpretive framework for viewing language as a strategic meaning-making source, and the focus on analysis of the products of social interaction. Meaning is socially negotiated. In other words, whereas a lot of linguistic grammars or linguistic schools are based on looking at formal systems of grammar, syntactics, or looking at qualitative semantics or logical semantic formations or things like that. This is a linguistic school that is really looking at the way language interacts with the world around it, that is really looking at meaning making as the primary function of language, and that meaning making is something that is socially negotiated, that's negotiated within the context of culture. So there's four major claims to functional linguistics. One is that language is functional. The other is that function is to make meanings. These meanings are influenced by social and cultural contexts that they are exchanged in. And the process of using language is a semiotic process. In other words, the use of signs and symbolic reference to indicate meaning or point to possible meanings by virtue of making meanings by choosing amongst all possible means of signification, acquire meaning against a background of choices. This is one of the things that's always kind of bothered me about functional linguistics. There's an assumption that there are all sorts of backgrounds or all sorts of choices that could become available, and that the meaning you signify in your conversation, in your speech, or in your writing is judged against what you possibly could have meant. So for instance, if I say something like, "My darling sunshine of a boy loves to wake me up in the morning to spend time together," that means something different than if I just say my son likes to wake me up in the morning, which means something different than if I say that brat or my brat loves to wake me up in the morning. One might be a little saccharine for your taste, the other one's fairly neutral, and the other one is downright kind of harsh when one's talking about their progeny. You can also interpret perhaps the first one as being somewhat sarcastic, particularly if I change the meaning from loves to wake me up in the morning to refuses to let me sleep in. If I say my darling sunshine of a son refuses to let me sleep in, then there's certainly a ring of sarcasm that might not be there in the other meaning. So having all these different choices of the way to refer to certain things gives different shades of possible meanings, and it's that comparison of what could have been meant as opposed to what is meant that for a lot of semantic information. Functional linguistics basically looks at every single piece of text, and text we'll get into in terms of a specialized word in the program. But every sort of bit of language has three particular meanings that are carried into it. This makes it a little bit more complicated than some other linguistic frameworks that are really only looking at conceptual or logical form frames. The one type of meaning is ideational, which is conceptual, dealing with experience and ideas, logical connections about events or experiences, ideas or events, basically. So it's all those sorts of things when we talk about usual conceptual content and semantics. It also conveys interpersonal meanings, social relations, status, level of affection, etc., like the interpersonal difference between my son and my brat, and as well as textual information has to do with surrounding texts and surrounding background informations. It's a meta-linguistic piece of information where the structure or the type of text in regards to other texts that surround it or itself conveys information. In other words, pieces of genre, certain linguistic contexts, like the fact that I just gave you 3 sentences about my son waking me up in the morning. That might not necessarily mean he wakes me up in the morning. That just might mean that you're getting examples of linguistics or semantic strings in context of this presentation. Purpose of me actually saying something like that. Information flow and order. So it's a meta-linguistic issue in terms of what type of. A note about text in particular. Text is sort of a specialized word in FL. Texts are the highest semantic unit operating in a context, topic, or situation. In other words, it's the highest or largest piece of language that has solely focused on a certain sort of context in particular. That text could be a phrase, it could be a clause, it could be a short answer, it could be a complete conversation, an article, a book, a whole certain things. There are macro texts in terms of writing an entire book about, domestic relationships and housework. There could be an article about the importance of being able to share housework and domestic relationships, or particular issues in dealing with recycling. You could have a conversation that goes something along the lines of, did you sort the recycling and take out the garbage? No, I thought you were going to do it. Well, you said you were going to do it last night. I was busy or I was drunk. Let's talk about your drinking. So I don't know, something like that. Just a huge conversation or whatever about the topic of taking out the garbage. Or you could have a short answer, did you take out the garbage? No. So there are whole strings and ranges of amounts of language that can be applied to certain contexts, and those vary according to different arenas of presentation. So texts are just basically a single semantic set of language dealing with continually one piece of context, or one piece of, or one situation in particular. A complete instance of meaning is defined by or within a context. So a text is the entirety of meaning is defined within a certain situation, such as, why don't you ever take out the garbage in the morning? Functional linguistics is about understanding the quality of these texts, why something means what it does, and why it is valued as it is. In other words, why does this have a particular sort of meaning within this context, and how does it achieve that meaning based on the text. This is a short little bit. I'm talking longer than I wanted to about this topic, but I wanted to show this to you. This is sort of a Halliday type diagram, and the reason why it's important is because Halliday talks a little bit about language, looking at it from different viewpoints, the viewpoint of a far and a viewpoint of short instance. And this is kind of what he's sort of going at a little bit in the article. This is kind of backwards. The instance column should be on the left-hand side, and the system column should be on the right-hand side, I guess. But in terms of time moving in a direction, we like to go left to right. But it's about the relationship in terms of looking at a variety of instances or a variety of sort situations and the texts that occur with them, and against the background of a longer view or an aggregate view of a variety of different instances, different situations, different texts that occur, and creating or coming up with a system. So there is the context of the situation, which is the moment of instance in time. The relation of language to that situation in its particular moment is a piece of language as a text, in particular to this particular linguistic system. Taken in an aggregate, certain contexts of situations create contexts of culture. When you have a large aggregate similarity of situations or viewpoints or ways of interpreting the world, that creates that is part of what makes up a culture. So perhaps we have an entire culture of people wondering who is taking care of the recycling every morning in their households. And the language that is in the systemic column is language as a system. So we have a situation where the context of the situation generates language as a text. The context of culture creates a language system, or language as a system, and the language system will reflect back upon that culture and help shape it as well. So there's a reflexivity about the vertical relationships here, but there is a definite situation where all these instances are basically the same thing as the actual system. They're just separated by their actual individual discrete instance moments, if you will, whereas the other is the system of all these things taken into an aggregate and looking at into a relationship. So context of situations deal with looking at situation types, text types that relate to those situations. The context of culture is the cultural domain, and language as a system deals with things that are linguistic systems generated from the culture, types of register, the actual type of language itself, its dialectical variations, and that sort of thing. So there's a certain relationship there in terms of context and language, that is the vertical set, and then the horizontal relationship is the relationship of time and aggregation. Important because Halliday talks a little bit about that sort of framework or thinking in the context of the article. Just real quick, because I've talked way too long about this stuff and way more than I wanted to, I'm probably going to be talking just as much about the article as this, so it's going to be, you got a lot of audio from me today. Grammatical metaphor. The only reason why I'm bringing this up is because Halliday does talk about grammatical metaphor for a page or two in the article. Simply speaking, grammatical metaphor is a grammatical construction that departs from the simplest or most direct way of stating the same meaning. The simplest or most direct way of stating the meaning in FL framework is called a congruent. That's not really important to know, it's just something I threw in there. Basically, it's typically a combination of a word meaning with another grammatical category. So we have this word length. It's actually a mixture of two things, the concept of longness or shortness, the adjective long, plus noun or nouniness. So we've made a noun out of the whole adjectival idea of long when we created the word length. This obviously happens a lot in nominalization in English, which means it happens a lot in scientific discourse, which is what Halliday talks about in the article. For instance, water evaporates faster at higher temperatures versus evaporation. The nominalization of the verb takes place at higher temperatures. It's typically used in science and nominalization. You can find it work the other way around. You can find verbs created from nouns, like I googled something. But, you know, in education conversation, it's the nominalization issue that sometimes causes problems. So it's a shift from a clausal to a nominal declination, so basically a shorthand way of saying something. That's grammatical metaphor. It's kind of weird in the sense that English is different compared to a lot of languages in the ease in which we slip in and out of grammatical categories with different semantic contents. And it's one of the issues that focusing on grammatical metaphor, that I'm just extemporaneously going off on something irrelevant here, but that makes functional linguistics really tied into English system. So there are some issues with it, but this gives you just a little bit of background, the importance of text and context, system versus instance, the overall focus on meaning making is socially negotiated amongst a culture. Those are some of the primary things to think about when you're reading the Halliday article. Hopefully it's a bit helpful and not too long-winded. Thank you.